What the hell is going on with Carlos Ghosn? What's the excitement and why is it important? And how does that impact the automotive industry? You might find it interesting. I would say it's the next movie that's going to be really exciting, and you probably want to learn more. Stay right with us. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Lauren Fix, and this is 4 Minute Friday. Now, one of the hottest topics is the story about Carlos Ghosn. So, I'd like to go through some of the how, when, why, where, and what this all means to you, give it all to you in a short synopsis so that you are empowered with knowledge and knowing what's going on in your automotive world. The first question is, who is Carlos Ghosn? Well, he's a gentleman who was born in Brazil. He has Lebanese heritage, so he has multiple citizenships. He went to school in France. He's an engineer, very brilliant guy, worked for Michelin. By the time he was 30, he was the president of Michelin South America. So it gives you an idea, he was very successful. When he came back to France, Renault, a car corporation there, said, could you help us save our company? He went to Renault, a French car corporation, and helped them create a profit. At some point, Nissan approached him and said, boy, we could really use your help. We are really in trouble. And this was in the mid 90s, and they were in a lot of financial trouble. Carlos Ghosn came on board and he helped build Nissan to be a very successful company, all underneath Japanese ownership, and included Mitsubishi at a later date to create a platform to share technology. This gave all three companies really good viability and sales in the past. But what happened? Well, at one point he decided, I've done okay. I've brought billions of dollars in cash into the Nissan company, and now I'm going to step down. But Nissan asked him to come back to help him with one last thing, and that's where the story turns. The next question is, why did Carlos Ghosn get arrested? He was a CEO of a car company. He was 65 years old. He was a citizen of three countries. He had done such great things for all these companies. He was a genius. People in our industry thought very highly of him. There were a lot of successful people in our industry, but he was someone who was known both visually and just about everything he had done successfully. So why did they arrest him? They brought him to Japan with another US citizen named Greg Kelly on false pretenses, saying, we need you. We need you to come back. It's something really important. And the moment his plane and Greg Kelly's plane land, and Greg Kelly was supposed to have surgery and he didn't want to go, but he went last minute thinking, I got to do what's right for the company, like many of us would do. The moment they landed, they were arrested. These two gentlemen were arrested. They were put into prison, but the Japanese rules are completely different than that of here in the US. Anytime that you're interviewed, you have an attorney, well, those rules are all out the door in Japan. They have their own rules, and that's where things get a little bit twisted. They're allowed to hold you for 52 days without accusing you. And during that time, Carlos Ghosn was constantly questioned to admit guilt. The Japanese government says they were told by Nissan that he underreported his salary, which would be very difficult because the Security and Exchange Commission, but they claim it was underreported to millions of dollars, and neither did Nissan, which is interesting because in Japan, Nissan pleaded guilty to that charge, but in the US, they pleaded not guilty, which is very interesting. Over those 52 days, he's now sleeping on the floor of a concrete cell with a bowl of rice per day and no clue what time of day it was because there was no daylight or sunlight. The light was on all the time. And that is the way the Japanese coerce you into admitting guilt. They accuse you, and if you don't accept that accusation, they go after your family, which is why they have a 99.7% conviction rate. And it does convince a lot of people to plead guilty because they just want it to be over with, which means you end up in jail. Very few people ever get acquitted. Ghosn had been detained for more than 100 days. He left the Tokyo prison on a $9 million bail, were meritless, and the Japanese government weren't going to give up. Less than 24 hours later, Carlos Ghosn was rearrested and put back into jail, with more charges given to them by Nissan. Over the 400 days in captivity for Carlos Ghosn, he only got to speak to his wife a total of 2 hours, which was recorded, and an attorney sat present during those conversations. The next question is, why did all this happen? Why is it important that they arrested someone? Why do we care that someone potentially could have done something wrong? Well, the real reason for the arrest behind Carlos Ghosn, and this was proven in a press conference on January 8th in Lebanon, where currently Carlos Ghosn is living, and he escaped, and we'll discuss that in a moment because that's part of the exciting part of the story, is the merger we had discussed briefly. Nissan was working with Renault, who is also working with Mitsubishi. Renault owns 43% of Nissan, and Nissan owns 15% of Renault, but there's no voting power there. And Nissan owns 34% of Mitsubishi, which is another Japanese car company. Where all this came into play was when Carlos Ghosn saw that there was failures going on all three companies as far as sales and profits were down. We were coming out of a recession. What do? Well, what you do is you make these three companies tighter, share more content, share more parts, share more facilities, use cross platforms, all the things that a lot of car companies do in order to save money. Top executives at Nissan did not want to merge any tighter with a French car company. That was sort of an insult. They're a very proud country with very proud citizens. Nissan, that has done so well and held up their CEO as a god, did not want this to happen. Now, what do you mean they held him up as a god? Well, even in Lebanon, they put his Carlos Ghosn's face on a postage stamp. They even made comic books, because anime is so popular in Japan, with Carlos Ghosn showing how he was creating a success, helping people understand how they can make their companies a success, part of their culture. But Nissan did not want that. Some top executives said we need to not have this merger with Renault. And how do we stop it? Well, in many cases, you would think just fire the guy. Well, that wasn't the case because there are lawyers involved and paperwork in play. So they created a scandal, and there's paperwork to back it up. And that's what they used to try to end Carlos Ghosn's life, his career, and destroy everything that he had built. And because of that, he was left with no option but to figure out an escape plan. How and why did Carlos Ghosn escape? Well, first off, why? The choice was death or be in prison forever, which was kind of the goal of these executives, is to get rid of Carlos Ghosn, period, whether he was guilty or not, but we'll see in the end. How did Carlos Ghosn escape? That's sort of the big story, and no one really knows all the details, and he certainly doesn't want to tell everyone. So he hired, from what we know, an expat, Green Berets. These guys are expert in taking people out of captivity. The story goes that Carlos Ghosn walked out of his apartment. He did have surveillance. Everybody wore face masks because of germs and pollution. He went to a hotel to have coffee, and at that point, he was never to be seen. He supposedly went into a car. From there was taken to the bullet train, which goes 300 miles an hour to Kansai Airport. That is the airport that is private, has the lowest security. He was put into an audio case that had holes in it because everything went through x-ray security. If it was small enough, they would have seen a human being. It was large enough, they opened the top. Nothing appeared to be anything different than the regular audio equipment, and onto a private plane that had 2 U.S. citizens listed on the roster. That plane departed Japan. Freedom was almost there. The plane landed in Istanbul, and during that time, Carlos Ghosn was let out of the case, where he had a second French passport, got on a private plane to go to Lebanon, to Beirut, where he lives now. He now is at his own home. He is back to his wife and his family, and this is where the press conference came in on January 8th. Carlos Ghosn told us in the press conference yesterday everything that most of us in the auto industry kind of knew. He claims that the Japanese legal system is a rigged system. They have a high conviction rate. So what's going to happen now? What does all this mean? Well, there are three possible options. In the public opinion court, it was a home run press event. Really impressive. And the bottom line was, we believe he's not guilty. So what could possibly happen? Well, he's willing to be tried in another court. They could easily drop the charges saying that none of this was true. Is that likely? We don't know that. But we do know is the leader of Japan said this should have been handled internally with Nissan and not taken into the Japanese courts. Sounds like a CYA to me. The second potential option is Japan says we have your $13.7 million in total bail money, and we're going to keep it, and anything else that you potentially left into this country. That would mean they found him guilty, and they're not going to be able to get him extradited because Lebanon does not extradite, and neither will France. The third possibility is that Carlos Ghosn will remain in Lebanon. He will be a consultant for the auto industry, most likely, or a consultant for a lot of other industries. We know that overall he spent $20 million to escape. He left $13.7 million in Japan, which he'll probably never see again, and he lost his company. And the weirdest thing is, Nissan employees around the world went into his private homes that Nissan paid for because he was the CEO and cleaned out personal effects and, of course, corporate paperwork. So we don't know what's missing. He's trying to put all that together, but this is still an interesting story that's unfolding. Greg Kelly is still in captivity. He is a U.S. citizen. He is held in a private apartment with an ankle bracelet, we are told. He was part of Carlos Ghosn's team. So there's a lot of things that are still left hanging. And Japan's response to the press conference was putting charges up against Carol Ghosn, Carlos's wife, for perjury. Really? I mean, they're really grasping at straws now. The fact is, she's not going back to Japan. He's not going back to Japan. In the court of public opinion, Carlos Ghosn is innocent. This was a coup. And what does that mean to you? And the future for Nissan, Mitsubishi, and Renault? Well, that's to be seen. Sales are down, profits are down, and we'll be watching and reporting to you to let you know. We'll let you know when the movie comes out. Who should play Carlos Ghosn in the movie? I'd love to hear your response. If you have any other questions, let me know. I'm happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to check out some of our other videos here, and we'll look forward to chatting with you next week.